Good morning, Dr. Lam. Thank you for coming in today to answer some of our questions. We know that you're busy, so we're going to jump right in. Now, in Chicago and Detroit, we've also seen COVID-19 have a serious impact on people of color, with a disproportionately high death rate in the African American community. Why is this happening?
Yeah, so this is a very good question. We are looking closely at the data and parsing it out from the CDC to really understand what is going on. And according to the Brookings Institute, what they have reported is that relative to Caucasians, the blacks are more likely to live in neighborhoods with a lack of healthy food options, green spaces, recreational facilities, lighting, and safety, and even better air quality. Also, blacks are more likely to live in densely populated areas where they may not have equitable healthcare access, meaning that the nearest hospital may be many miles away from their home, and perhaps the pharmacies and the health network infrastructure are subpar.
New York State now has the most COVID-19 cases in the country, but Governor Andrew Cuomo says less people are coming into the hospital. Why is that?
So it could be, again, just a reflection of the shelter in place in New York, and people are heeding the governor's warnings, and they're managing the symptoms at home, and they're not going to the hospital. And that's a good sign. And we think that perhaps maybe New York is reaching its plateau, and hopefully after this weekend or end of this week, New York would go down on the other side of this incline.
Finally, I'd like to talk about potential treatments. Hydrochloroquine, an anti-malaria drug, is being pushed by the Trump administration despite Dr. Fauci's concerns. Could this drug be effective, and are there any potential dangers?
Yes. So we don't have the evidence to say with 100% confidence that this drug, hydroxychloroquine, is effective against COVID-19. And to address your second question about the potential dangers of hydroxychloroquine, it does have a lot of dangers, and that's why Dr. Fauci and the medical community are emphasizing and reiterating to be cautious with the use of hydroxychloroquine and not to run away with this drug and say it is the cure-it-all of COVID-19.
All right, that wraps up our questions for today. I want to thank you so much for being part of our podcast and for taking the time out of your day to talk to us.
Great. Thank you again for the opportunity.
For Chapman News, this is Nina Hatton. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Lam. Let's jump straight into our questions. Reopening the economy has been a topic on everyone's mind. What steps do we need to take to get there?
Before we can safely and confidently reopen our country, we need to first address the current situation about the lack of testing and medical supplies and perform contact tracing. And the purpose of contact tracing is to determine who have been exposed to the infected person so that we can test that individual who has been exposed and have that person stay home or be quarantined to minimize or prevent further community infection.
So something that you mentioned there was testing. We've heard from the Trump administration that testing isn't an issue. However, some medical experts disagree. What do you think about this?
Testing is still a very big issue in our country, and it is not available to all frontline healthcare workers. And let alone normal people like us, if we feel like we may have some symptoms, we cannot just simply go up to a clinic to get tested. So testing is the major obstacle or major limiting step right now to reopening our economy safely. There are two main types of testing. We have the diagnostic test to determine whether a person is truly infected or not, but we also have the antibody test, which determines whether that person was exposed to the virus and have developed immunity or antibodies to the virus. So we need to make sure that we have both. We have the capacity for both forms of tests available. The federal government is there supposed to help the states to provide that support, as well as to make sure that we are successful in offering tests as well as analyzing test results.
Yes, there's also been a lot of talk about startup companies creating testing. Are those safe?
For right now, I know that people are desperate to return back to work and to get their life back to some kind of normalcy. My advice would be to stay with the standardized tests that have been validated by reputable laboratory companies. So I would refrain from actually going with any homemade or any made-up test kit that hasn't been validated or vetted through some form of standardized system offered by the state or the federal government.
Thank you, Dr. Lam. That actually concludes our questions for today. I want to thank you so much for being on the Chapman News Podcast, and we'll talk to you next week.
Great. Thank you for having me.
For Chapman News, this is Nina Hatton. Thanks, Carissa. I'm here with Dr. Lam, so let's jump straight into our questions. Several states this week announced that they will be reopening their economies with social distancing guidelines. Is this a good idea in terms of public health?
To be honest, it's not really a good time to reopen, but we have to work with those who are anxious and fidgety to leave their homes. So we have to make a compromise in essence, and the White House is consulting with public health experts and hopefully business people as well to make sure that the steps for reopening the economy and our states are common sense and also to protect the safety of our citizens.
Thank you. One of these states is Georgia, which has not met the federal guidelines for reopening. Governor Brian Kemp says the state is on track, though, with ER visits declining and reports showing COVID-19 rates to be flattening. Is this enough data to reopen the economy?
Based on the information that he has shared with us and the factual information that we have gathered from healthcare workers and public health experts in that same state, it seems to me it's contradictory. So I don't want to get into the political quagmire of this, but I would lean towards more trusting the science and the facts rather than hearing from politicians.
Now, what numbers do we want to see before governors begin reopening economies?
The main goal is to see there is a significant percentage of at least 10-20% reduction in infection rates. But again, that is not a hard number set in the guidelines. It's something that many of us in the community hope to see as a reduction in hospitalizations and deaths.
Now, what could the impact be for us in California? Will this end up hurting other states?
Yes, it would definitely hurt other states simply because we are not grounded just within the borders of our state. We do travel from state to state. There is a fear that people who may be exposed and are asymptomatic and not know it, they can be a spreader of this virus to the community that is unknowingly exposed to them.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for answering our questions this week.
Great. Thank you very much.
For Chapman News, this is Nina Hatton. Thanks, Justin. I'm here today with our medical expert, Dr. Jerika Lam. Today's topic is remdesivir, the drug the FDA is planning to announce emergency use authorization of to treat COVID-19 patients. Jerika, what is remdesivir?
Remdesivir is a prodrug. It's an antiviral drug, and it inhibits the RNA polymerase enzyme. This virus uses this enzyme to make more copies of itself. So we can imagine that remdesivir blocks this enzyme from working, so therefore future copies of the virus will not be produced. So we are hopeful right now that this drug can be combined with other agents to fight against the COVID-19 infection.
Now, we've heard the term emergency use authorization being thrown around a lot. What does that mean?
The emergency use authorization, otherwise known as EUA, is issued in response to public health emergencies in our country, and it's intended to offer an urgent need to either diagnose, prevent, or treat a medical threat when there are no adequate and approved treatment options available. With regard to remdesivir, based on the mortality rate, even though it's modest, it shows a decline in patients receiving remdesivir. Also, it shows a recovery time of at least 31% faster than those who did not receive remdesivir. So these are two significant parameters that help the FDA to realize there is promise to this drug. And so moving forward with any clinical trial that involves the use of therapeutics against COVID-19, remdesivir will be the standard of care. So this is good news for us to use, to have a benchmark drug to use against and compare the efficacy and safety of newer drugs.
And are there any potential dangers of expediting this drug?
So we need to consider the risks of waiting for that, cure-it-all drug treatment versus using a drug treatment that has shown some benefit. Even if the benefit is modest, it is hopeful in reducing, again, the length of hospital stay and death, because we understand that the longer patients do stay in the ICU setting, the higher the likelihood of death will occur. And so the faster recovery time that patients do have with this remdesivir drug or any new drug, and the faster time that they're discharged from the hospital, that's a better chance for their survival.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you answering all of our questions here today, and we'll talk to you next week.
Great. Thank you so much. Take care.
For Chapman News, this is Nina Hatton. Thanks, Lindsay. I'm here again with our medical expert, Dr. Jerika Lam. Thank you for being with us, and let's jump right in. Research coming out of Los Alamos National Laboratory says that the COVID-19 virus may have mutated. Can we trust this?
And we know that there are claims of the strain that, there are two strains that have landed in our country. One came from Europe and one came from China. That the one that is supposedly coming from Europe is the more virulent strain that hit New York and the East Coast, and that's why there were more infection rates and also more deaths because of the different type of strain. On the other hand, the strain that hit the West Coast states, that strain is supposedly coming from Wuhan, China, and it's reported to be less virulent, but we don't know yet. So the upshot from all this hype and all of this buzz is that we know that viruses do mutate. They replicate millions of copies of itself every day. In this rapid replication rate, they are prone to having errors where there's going to be non-functional viruses produced, but also it could be a new strain being produced. So these are all speculation of what's going on with the SARS-CoV-2 virus right now. We don't have the actual evidence to say that there are two strains right now, but we think there are.
Finally, let's talk about fast-tracking the vaccine. Where are we in the process, and can we trust it?
What we realize is that this is not really new in terms of fast-tracking vaccines. So I did a little research into this process, and vaccines in the past, the chickenpox, for example, and flu-mist vaccines, the flu vaccine, originally took 28 years because, we wanted to be safe, and also we didn't have all the technology as well as perhaps many competing pharmaceutical companies jumping on board to create a vaccine, to 15 years for the HPV vaccine to be approved. And then the vaccine against mumps was considered lightning fast. It only took 4 years. So we shortened the time period. In 2009, the researchers actually created vaccines against the swine flu virus, and that only took 5 months. So in essence, it is possible to actually condense the time period to produce a vaccine by using the already existing materials that many pharmaceutical companies have to create some form of vaccine that will be effective against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So we're not starting from scratch, unlike when we were way back when creating the chickenpox and the flu-mist vaccine. Right now we have all the ingredients ready. We just need to put the right ingredients together to make an effective vaccine.
Thank you. This has been Ask the Expert with Chapman News. My name is Nina Hatton. Thanks, Justin. I'm here again with our medical expert, Dr. Jerika Lam, so let's jump straight in. A documentary called Plandemic went viral this week and details some outrageous claims about the pandemic. What's your response to this video?
My perspective is that this is created by, as I've heard, it's created by a scientist who's actually been debunked by many of her peers and colleagues within the scientific community. This video has a lot of flaws and a lot of holes in terms of its storytelling, and it's just another way to inflame the conspiracy theories as well as to take advantage of the constantly evolving facts that we are trying to gather and trying to study. I think definitely this video is not helping the American society in terms of giving us more confidence in what is really going on and what our policymakers and healthcare workers are trying to do, especially those at the front line. So I would encourage those just to listen to their physicians, their researchers, their scientists, stick with the facts and the evidence because that will guide you to the truth.
Thank you. Now, we've talked about testing before on our show, but let's go over it once again. Why is testing so important, and how is the U.S. testing stacking up to the rest of the world?
Testing is so important is because we are working in the dark. We are blinded. We don't know who is symptomatic, who is asymptomatic. And if we are to be reopening our society and our economy, we need to know who is actually infectious, who can spread the virus to one another. I guess your other part of the question, how are we doing as a country? I think we have much more room for improvement. We need to do better. We are always comparing ourselves with other countries, and I think we are much better than many countries, but we are still lagging behind some of the European countries and also South Korea.
Absolutely. And do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm privileged and honored to be able to participate in your newsworthy stories as well as to do my best to share the facts with you and the listeners. My take-home message for everyone is please just listen to the guidelines. Don't let your feelings take over. Don't let your emotions take over your actions or your head. Think with your head and listen to the experts.
And thank you, Dr. Lam, for sharing your expert opinion with us for the last couple of weeks. We've loved having you on the podcast.
Great. Thank you. It's my pleasure. And happy graduation and congratulations, Nina.
Thank you, Dr. Jerika. For Chapman News, this is Nina Hatton.